Hi, good evening, and welcome to the Staten Island Open Streets panel discussion. My name is Camila Hanks. I'm President and CEO of the Historic Tappan Park Community Partnerships. I am a big proponent of open streets and just really happy to be here to see all of you here because I think this is a very important discussion that we're having. I wanted to just say a few words about Rose Skanowski. You know, she's a bit ahead of her time, and I think we owe her such like a big snap because if it weren't for Rose's activism and keeping us in the heart and mind of what it means to have, everything that the other four boroughs have here in Staten Island, we wouldn't be this far. And I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you for the guest speakers who we will introduce after I let Rose say a few words.
Sure. So thank you for that, Camilla. I do appreciate it. And thank you for everyone who is here. I agree that this is definitely an important discussion. Panel open streets are about more than just, giving folks space. It's definitely about equity. It's about rethinking the way we use our streets and rethinking the way we see and understand public space itself. I think that our streets have way more potential than the way that they're used right now. And hopefully, the Open Streets program can help more people understand that potential.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm just going to introduce the panelists. So I'm going to start with the wonderful Sarah Blass. She's going to be joining us. She's the founder and executive director of the Staten Island Therapeutic Gardens and the coordinator of the Child Wellness Initiative at the Staten Island Partnership for Community Wellness. And she's really coming on board to talk to us and share her thoughts on equitable distribution of open space and what it means as from her perspective. Next, we have Heather Butts, but she's going to be a little bit late, so I'm going to pop right over to my oldest friend on this event, Bobby Digi. He is the owner of O. Henry's Public House and president and CEO of Island Voice, but he's just so much more. And he's going to talk to us in a perspective that's near and dear to my heart, which is the economic development benefits of what open streets means to economic recovery. So to kick us off, I'm going to introduce Andrew Ronan, and he's from the NYC Department of Transportation. He's going to tell us a little bit about this initiative, Open Streets, and give us a bit of a background. Andrew, you want to kick it off?
Sure thing. Thanks very much, Camilla. I'm Andrew Ronan. I'm the Assistant Director of Community Partnerships in the Public Space Unit at New York City Department of Transportation. We're the unit that is currently overseeing the Open Streets program. So Open Streets came about as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As you're all aware, the mayor pledged to work towards at least 100 miles of streets open to pedestrians, cyclists, and socially distant activity with a significant reduction to car traffic. Really briefly, an open street is a stretch of road that permits local access only. Motorists must move through at 5 miles an hour. They can come in to park, they can come in to drop something off, pick something up, but they can't use it as a through street. They can't just go zooming through the neighborhood. And that leaves a space over for people to use it to walk around. I think to date, we're up to 67 miles, maybe closer to 70 miles of open streets. I just have my list of Staten Island open streets in front of me, so let me get back to it. We have about 5 existing open streets currently in Staten Island. Really quickly, they're on Silver Lake Park Road, Bank Street, Water Street, Canal Street, and the newest one, which is part of our Open Streets Restaurants program, is on New Dorp Lane. So Open Streets, since its sort of inception in May, has grown, and we've added an element that now also seeks to support local businesses, particularly right now, restaurants. So New Dorp Lane applied to be part of our Open Streets Restaurants program, which will take an open street or create an open street and temporarily close it to traffic on Friday evenings, Saturdays, and Sundays, and allow businesses that are participating in the Open Restaurants program to have even greater space for more dining opportunities to serve more people. So it's Fridays from 5 to 11, Saturdays and Sundays from noon to 11. We were really excited to get New Derp Lane on the list in the first round of those. So we love Staten Island. Don't get me wrong. So yeah, so that's really the basics on how Open Streets works. Anyone can still apply to host an open street. We changed the system just a little bit so that if you want to propose an open street in your neighborhood or somewhere, you can do so through your borough commissioner's office. If you are a business or a group of businesses or a community-based organization that wants to manage an open streets restaurant, there is an application process at nyc.gov/open restaurants. And we need a community partner there to manage the street closure, and we need all the restaurants to participate and follow the guidelines in open restaurants. For a regular open street, there are two kind of models, two ways in which they work. One is sort of where we've taken a proposal and we've handed it off to NYPD to manage the closures. And the other is where we have a community-based organization that's stepping up and willing to do some level of management to place the barricades in the morning, to take them away in the evening, and to keep an eye on things. That second model is much more preferable and kind of speaks to the more successful open streets that we've had. But there you go. That's the basics on open streets for the moment.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. So Rose wanted me to do a bit of an icebreaker for the panelists. So this is, it just kind of happens at the end. It's kind of, but it's a definite, think back to the old days in New York when summers were spent outside in a non-COVID world. What game would you bring back? What street games would you bring back?
Is that for everyone?
That's for the panelists.
Hopscotch.
Hopscotch. We have Heather here.
Yes.
Hi.
Sorry, I teach at Columbia, so I had to teach.
So I want to do a quick introduction with Heather Butts. She is the co-founder and executive director of Health for Youth and an adjunct professor at the Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. And she's really going to be joining us to talk about the public health benefits of open streets. So we just started it off by saying, what kind of street games do you think would be appropriate for open streets, and what are the games that you remember when you were younger?
Does dodgeball count?
What'd she say?
I said dodgeball. That's probably
dodgeball.
not a great. That's not a great. That's the one I remember because I didn't like it. It was not fun for me. I heard Bobby, did you talk about hopscotch? And I think that's a super fun one. I'm a super nerd, so honestly, I'd be the kid off playing like chess with somebody else or something like that.
That's my other game. That's the other favorite game.
Yeah, that's what I would be doing. I'd be playing chess or,
Yes.
something like that. So that's probably what I would bring back.
Sarah?
All of those things sound absolutely amazing. I'm going to list two things. One is the Learn to Ride events that I did with Rose and Heather Butts. We did so many of them for like the last 2 years, so I'm so distraught that we won't be able to do them this summer. And then if I had to really dig into my childhood, I would say double dutch.
Thank you.
Double dutch.
I wasn't coordinated enough for that. I did single dutch.
That still counts.
You did skip rope.
Do it next to someone else and it's tandem dutch.
Right.
I'm not going to Columbia either, so I could play double dutch, but I'm not in Columbia, so I think we all worked out. Okay, so let's get this started. Thank you, everybody. I can see everybody's face here. I see Laura Jean Waters. I see Dana. I see Stephanie. I'm really happy to see so many folks here. Adrian Abadi, Darcy, I'm really happy to see you guys. So we're going to kick off. The first question is going to be for Bobby. How do you see open streets helping restaurants, especially with existing limitations in indoor dining?
Open street is like the best thing that happened to restaurants since COVID-19. and with restaurants just looking for ways to adapt to the pandemic. And I happened to actually, I was on a panel testifying at City Council because, I mean, there's so many businesses that were going out of business because, there was no hope for indoor dining. And as you know, on Monday, we're supposed to have been phase 3, where we were supposed to have been allowed to have 50% indoor dining. And that, was canceled due to the rise in numbers nationally. So I think with open streets, it's allowed for us, and for O. Henry's Public House, business has slightly started, there's been an uptick. And that's, of course, because we can serve outside. So I think it's a ray of hope for the small businesses, although it has to be managed because there are some businesses who are abusing that privilege. But overall, it's what's needed right now to give hope to businesses being able to sustain.
Yeah, I think that was well said. Thank you very much. And I concur. I agree with that 100%. The next question is for Sarah Blass. Can you briefly describe the types of conditions you're facing, and given these conditions, why do folks in NYCHA housing need open streets?
Absolutely. So here on Staten Island, there's about, last time that I checked the reports, 9,700 and some odd residents who are living in NYCHA facilities. I personally think that that's really an underestimate because so many families are doubled up with other families. But to just think about the day in the life of a family who is living in a NYCHA facility, you want to think about the reoccurring mold issues. You want to think about playgrounds that are really unsafe. You want to think about some of the infrastructure that's unsafe. You want to think about the front yards and some of the unsafe things that you see there. And there's a multitude of reasons why those things exist. But just think about how that impacts a child, how that impacts a family structure, the emotional well-being, the physical well-being, and how it exacerbates severe health conditions. So when children are already facing all of those things and they go outside and they don't have safe playgrounds to play, I mean, it's obviously an issue. So if there's any way to create open streets in those vicinities where families can have more of an opportunity, not just for open spaces, but for safe open spaces, I think it's a win. And it was a need for these communities before COVID-19. So it certainly is a huge need now during this pandemic.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. And I agree with you in the work that you're doing there with the therapeutic gardens, and everything is just outstanding, and we really appreciate that. So my first round of questions is going to end with Heather. And I would like to ask, the biggest public health argument for open streets is that they will offer people the space needed for social distancing. Why aren't sidewalks adequate?
So much to say about that, but I'll be brief. So I actually, before I came here, so I teach at Columbia and I teach at Long Island University. That's actually my main appointment. I'm an assistant professor there in public health. And I was just having this conversation because I don't know if many of you know, but there's a recent scientific call that went out from 239 researchers and scientists to the World Health Organization, and essentially the paper was labeled "We need to talk about airborne COVID." And I think the way that most people think about COVID, I assume, I'm a public health person, so it's a little hard for me to divorce myself from a scientific perspective from being just layperson me, but I assume that most people think about COVID as you cough or you sneeze and something goes in the air and it hits somebody else and you get COVID. I guess that's how most people think about COVID. And that's a pretty good way to think about it, because COVID-19 is the the actual disease name. COVID stands for, I don't know if people know this, but COVID stands for CO is corona, BI is virus, D is disease, and it's called 19 because that's the year that we discovered it. So COVID-19. But the actual virus is a SARS virus. It's a CoV-SARS virus, and it's of the corona family that we know of. The common cold is a corona virus. So we've always, I think, thought of coronavirus, COVID-19, as something where you sneeze, it goes 6 feet, it hits somebody, or you ingest it, you potentially get COVID. But now the research is coming out more and more that it's a true airborne disease, not in the sense of it's in the air and then it hits somebody and then you get it or you breathe it, the droplets, but that the aerosols and the microns of COVID-19 stay in the air for a decent amount of time. So if I'm on a sidewalk or if I'm sitting at a restaurant and someone is in close proximity to me because they're walking by, that's not super comfortable, both for the scenario I just described and also for these approximately 6 feet of distance one needs if I sneeze or I cough and then somebody else is there. So you need space, right? You need space. You need a lot of space. And the research is showing that we need more space than we thought we needed in order for people to be able to be comfortable walking around, so you're distant from other people, and the nanoparticles and the microns and the larger droplets do not get into your space. So a sidewalk is not really going to be adequate for that. And if we're going to have people outside frolicking around and playing dodgeball and chess and hopscotch, then they're going to need some space, and that space is what we're talking about.
Like, you should be on television, right? Like, this is not a platform.
Oh,
because
I'm here with all of you, so I'd rather be here with you.
No, but we haven't gotten that from the news, and I think that's
Oh, really? Oh, okay. It's the world I live in. I do research stuff like 10 hours a day, so it's kind of just I have more of it right here. How to impress.
Gotta take you out and play some dodgeball, Heather. Okay.
Yeah.
So my next question, thank you so much, Heather. And again, that was just very informative. I appreciate that.
Sure, you're welcome.
Thank you. The next question is for Bobby. What have you heard from the patrons about outdoor dining, and what do you think about their experience?
It's been so Henry's Public House is on Minthorn Street, which is Bay and where Tompkinsville train station is, and that street is really suitable for the idea of an open street, because it isn't heavily traveled. There's plenty of parking, so it's an ideal street for this sort of a concept. So those that have who live in the Bay Street land in the surrounding neighborhood, they found this to be fun. The idea is cool. The patrons have enjoyed it. I often post about community folks who come by. I think it's something that, from what I'm sensing from my neighbors, Flagship Breweries, Flower and Oak, and Daddy-O's, it's something that we are going to embrace for a long time. If you recall, often, even in the past, before COVID, we had activities on the streets. So people are familiar with the neighborhood the street being closed. And I think, the idea of the open street is a case by case. It'll work in some streets, some neighborhoods, because of the way it's set up and the structures and it may not work in some neighborhoods. So it's not a one size fits all. And it's important to get input from the surrounding businesses. But for us, it's working out. We look forward to extending it. and we're actually applying for to have it, throughout the summer, and I think it's to the fall, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it's been great reviews.
I'm just going to go ahead and ask you the next question because I think it's relevant. So what do you say about this? When we first started talking about this as a group, and everyone was involved in this, and we were planning. So many of the businesses said, no, we can't do open streets. This is going to be bad for business. What do you say to those business owners who are worried that this may be something that's a hindrance to business because it's clear that it's having just the opposite effect?
I always, as an community actor, I always say this. People often will push against something that they're not familiar with and that's new to them. So I always try to encourage people to just keep an open mind, see how it works, get the questions answered, and have a full understanding of what is being offered, because many times you'll find that it's better than the previous circumstance. So I think that I did monitor that a little bit actually. Many of the business folks who did complain about that are actually some of the business folks who are really utilizing it, and that they're seeing the numbers and they're not able to manage the crowd and so on and so forth, because again, maybe they weren't prepared for it. I think the benefits outweigh the cons. I'll tell you why. Again, restaurant owners aren't allowed to serve indoors, so that means you're getting zero business. Now that you can serve on an open street or sidewalk, now you can gradually begin to open up your business, and people can begin to see what that's like, because part of what's happening now is that there's a fear of the virus spiking. There's a fear of the business owners being cognizant of what's occurring, the best practices. Are the business owners really opening responsibly? So that's some of the fear that's keeping patrons in. And I think when they get a chance to experience a restaurant or a business place that's actually carrying out the regulations properly, I've seen my customers return and feel more comfortable. I've seen that. I had a couple that came on Friday, for instance, Saturday, but their friends over. That's the Heath I'm talking about. And you begin to see that, and the fears that folks have is well recognized, But overall, I think it's great. I think those that complained earlier are the ones that you're seeing on social media, posting photos of all of these people that that are out.
I know. So I like the way that the questioning is going. So I'm also going to ask Sarah to answer. So Staten Island is the borough of parks, right? What would you say to people that argue that we don't need open streets because we have plenty of parks?
I would say that I would welcome them to attend one of my equity trainings, and I'd be happy to handhold them and take a deep dive into why a large percentage of the population, especially on the North Shore, has difficulty accessing those parks. And I would love to talk about the safety of some of those parks and what that looks like in certain neighborhoods. Open streets is not a replacement for our parks. It's not a replacement for advocacy around utilizing our parks or keeping our parks safe at all. It's just an additional building block to really help keep people active and safe, especially during COVID-19.
That's well said. And I would always say, you look at a neighborhood's park and you could see the health of the park will represent the health of the community surrounding it. And so I think that was absolutely well said. I have a question for Heather, who is just, we got to get you the good ones.
Thank you.
Good ones. So, and I think that we're like building this so everyone listening could see how we all, unpack
Progression.
And how this progressed and how we
got a progression
where Sarah is, Rose. So how can open streets meet mental health needs in underserved communities?
So I would say that that's a multifaceted question. And I would also say I come from a mental health family, psychiatrist, psychologist, social workers. So that's my background. So it's kind of in my DNA. And I personally think that mental health embodies both the mind and the physical. Sort of, they're inextricably linked. You can't take one without the other. And so when we think about open streets and we think about mental health, what I would say is that people really, I think it can't be discounted in terms of the level of psychic trauma that a lot of people are under regularly. I did a paper a couple of years ago looking at a housing bias and post-traumatic stress disorder. And at its time, it was revolutionary. Now, I don't think anybody would be super shocked by it. But when I did the paper, it looked at the prevalence of post-traumatic stress on people who had been discriminated against for housing. So you go to try to get an apartment, you get denied, and you're African American, the next person walks in, they're white, they get the apartment, and like,
Lived
what's going on
experience.
there? Yeah, exactly. So, but what a lot of people hadn't looked at is the prevalence of PTSD post episode. So people would report, I got denied for housing. I had night sweats. I started to break out into hives. I was reimagining. You know, they were describing things very similar to people that had been in war. And so you have people who already are very traumatized. A lot of people are traumatized for a lot of different reasons, or are depressed. And I always say how people entered COVID from a mental health perspective is how it is going on for them. So if you entered COVID and you already had some mental health challenges, well, guess what? They didn't get alleviated because of COVID. They have gotten worse. And if you entered COVID and you had these issues, then that's what you're facing. So I would say that to the extent we have people who, a lot of people, I mean, it's just regular people, regular folks who entered COVID with a lot of issues and a lot of trauma and a lot of pain and a lot of mental health issues. They are struggling with those now. So I think COVID is actually a really ripe opportunity to be able to help people with those issues. And then when we get out of COVID, which there will be an out of COVID. I know it doesn't feel like it, but we will get there. So when we get on the other side of COVID, then we should keep these things. Because when we find an idea that we like, you know what we should do? We should keep it. So if we find that open streets help with mental health for people and expanding them has been helpful during COVID, why not keep them? Because the same people that were having some of these issues when they entered COVID, those issues haven't gone away, and they will need support on the back end for these issues. So to the extent that we expand, we keep them, we think more broadly about how to do other things with them. From a mental health perspective, it can help people who entered COVID in a somewhat fragile mental health state, and it can also keep people who maybe weren't in that fragile state, could have gotten a little bit more fragile during COVID. It can keep them on the road to recovery.
Wow. I agree with that 100%. Thank you so much, Heather. So Rose prepared a few questions that's really just up for, discussion. And I think that they're really important. I'm just looking at the chat just so I can make sure. Okay. Or someone is talking about open streets and bike lanes. And I think that, if Rose would allow that there could be an open discussion after, allow certain people from to put their questions in the chat. And then if we have some time, you can ask our panelists some questions. So basically, off of what Heather was saying, the COVID-19 pandemic won't last forever, but the major crises often have lasting impacts on public policy and infrastructure. Long after this current crisis is over, how do you see NYC permanently adapting based on lessons learned? And whomever wants to answer that question, I'm going to give it to Sarah. She raised her hand first.
Oh,
I'm
and
happy. I'm happy to dive in and talk about that. So there's been a lot of discussion around equity and why you see a very high mortality rate from COVID-19 in communities of color. And a lot of the activists and a lot of the public health specialists, many of us that are here today, have been talking about health disparities in communities of color, obesity, other chronic illnesses for decades. I know that my grandparents have been talking about it, and their grandparents and their grandparents have been talking about it. But it seems like people are finally getting it. So I think we're hearing and seeing a lot more policy around really trying to attack the root cause of these chronic illnesses. And so that way, when the next public health crisis hits, whatever that may look like, it's not going to be exacerbated by these conditions that can really be prevented.
Heather? Thank you, Sarah. Heather?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that sort of ultimately the thing that we have to think about is, where are we now? Where were we before COVID, and where are we going? And again, this sort of just goes off of kind of what I was talking about before. It's not like things were great for a lot of people before COVID. You know, you had a lot of people that had a lot of issues pre-COVID. You had people who, I mean, I think about this a lot in terms of just, you know, people who were kind of teetering on the brink financially, emotionally, psychically, physically before COVID. And now they're in the midst of COVID. And, you know, we often, I mean, I feel like, Bob, I feel funny calling you Bobby because I mean, you know, I think you're fabulous, but it's not like we're buddies. But I'll call you Bobby on here. I wouldn't normally say Mr. D, but it's not, I hope that Bobby would agree with me about this, is, you know, when you think about a restaurant, right? So restaurants like to have, you know, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, whatever it is, of working capital, right? You want to be able to sort of know that when hard times fall, you're able to rise to the occasion. People are the same way. You want to hope that when the bad times come, you've got a reserve along from a physical standpoint and a mental health standpoint to be able to weather the storms. But I would say the vast majority of people don't. So my hope, my real hope, and again, as somebody who, you know, I say this, Sarah's heard me say this, I thought I would live my days out being like, you know, in some little old folks home, gumming my applesauce, talking about Ebola and the H1N1 and the 1918 flu. That's what I thought I'd be doing. And it didn't work out that way. So since we have something here that has happened that we can hopefully learn from, let's learn from it. And let's do something different than what we've done with Ebola and with 1918 and with H1N1. So hopefully we can do that and have our 6 to 8 months of reserve, like restaurants and like other businesses, so that we won't be on empty driving through the streets of Staten Island.
Amen, sister. Sorry, that was great. So Bobby, do you want to weigh into that? Do you want me to repeat the question, or basically, you know, how do we see, like, you know, lessons learned? You're muted. So if you want to unmute yourself, there you go.
I was saying that Heather and Sarah did a great job at articulating those perspectives, but I want to add this to what they said. You know, Sarah mentioned the disparity between the Black and Brown communities, the Black communities having the highest death ratio. When you think about small businesses and, you know, people of color owning small businesses, you think about the barbershop, you think about the hair salons, you think about those, you know, small business owners who, as Heather said before, were struggling because of all of the inequities, you know, the socioeconomic inequities that we're aware of. I'm going to highlight this to you. Very, very interesting situation occurred to me personally. So I have O. Henry's Public House. and we had applied for the loans and so on and so forth. And then I have Canvas Institute, we had applied. And I got to tell you, and I saw this with the banks, there was a way that they dealt with certain businesses and the way that they looked at funding. And I mean, what was so glaring was the first round of the stimulus, the relief funds, as we all know, the huge businesses gulped all of the money. Even though we had positioned ourselves to apply even before it was released, the money was given to the huge corporations. Now that's indicative of how business had been done for many years, and when there are tragedies and so on and so forth. So thank God the stats out. I want to continue to fight and champion for, the Black and brown communities, the small business folks, because you hear about the small business being the backbone of America, but quite frankly, they're like the ATM and they're like the stepchild. I saw businesses, reputable businesses that were built on generations go out of business because they were not only marginalized, that it was just not the rhetoric that was in the news about supporting these businesses is not what played out. So like Heather said, again, it's very important. The lessons are out there, but what are we learning? What are we learning, and how are we adapting the reality to resolve the solutions? How are we creating structures that will produce outcomes that we are talking about? And it's good to see that people are empowered. A lot more folks are having real conversation, and my hope is that it actually translates to action. Because conversation without action is just blowing hot air. So yeah, I just wanted to add that angle to it.
And I'm sorry. Can I just make a quick comment on one of the chat comments that somebody made about PTSD, if I can, real fast?
Sure.
Please.
Okay. I just want to say, so there was a comment about something that I said earlier about PTSD, and Chris basically talked about how they have been discriminated against apartments, and they had not suffered from PTSD. And the one thing I will just say is that PTSD is not created equally and does not happen to people equally, right? So people, again, this is like the really sort of odd but interesting, fascinating world of our brains, is that certain people are predisposed to have certain reactions to certain things. Other people are not predisposed to have those reactions. There's a really interesting study. It's a Vietnam War study, and it looked at the prevalence of PTSD among Vietnam vets. And it found, I don't know if anybody's sort of interested in Myers-Briggs and personality, but it basically found that a distinct type of personality, it's this Myers-Briggs personality type called ISTJs, the prevalence of them having PTSD from the Vietnam War was like 65%. So basically, if you were an ISTJ, you were going to have PTSD. If you were the other 15 types, you were probably going to be okay. So I just say that to say that we need to be very, I would say, caring and sensitive to how people react to psychic pain. And I mean, I could walk into an office of a realtor and be discriminated against and walk right out and just say, okay, keep moving. And that actually is how I've responded to multiple episodes of discrimination and racism and that kind of trauma in my life. That doesn't mean that what I've experienced is any more or less traumatic or less traumatic, and doesn't mean that what the other person experienced is the same way. We just respond very differently to similar kind of pain. And so I just wanted to say that because I respected what Chris was saying, and my response would just be, we're all different. And how I might respond to something is very different than how you might respond, and what your history is very different than my history. And so I think in COVID, if we kind of just are all very cognizant of how we are all different and we can all experience things very differently, I think it'll go a long way in the humanity and humanizing of all of us.
Thank you, Heather.
Well said.
Well said. Well said.
And also, I just want to butt in very quickly. I definitely enjoy the conversation we're having, and I think it's a really important conversation for us to be having. But I do want to remind us that this is a panel about open streets. So if you could tailor your answers to the idea of open streets, then, I think that it would be appreciated to the audience. Sorry.
Thanks for reminding us.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
sorry.
we can do this for like 4 more hours. Let's just keep talking till like tomorrow. What are we talking about next?
So funny.
I know. So I think like the last question, and I do have my own thoughts on the importance of being outdoors and having open streets, and it's extremely important for so many reasons and so many nuanced reasons. But I think this next question is kind of in the hearts and minds of so many Staten Islanders, especially since when budget cuts happen, communities of color are adversely affected in so many ways. And the next question actually talks about that. So this is for everyone. As a result of this year's budget shortfall, severe cuts have been made to summer youth program. While open streets can't help our youth make up for lost income, how could the right programming allow open streets to keep our youth engaged?
I could take that.
I just want clean streets.
Yeah.
This is how you play with it.
I mean, I think that, the idea of streets being open for young people allows for skateboarding. If you all recall years ago, in the North Shore, before the skate park was built at Faber Pool, I skateboard myself, my kids as well. That was a big thing. And Camilla, you remember Van Duzer, Van Duzer's streets closing where, it was all about skateboarding.
That was downtown council. That was me.
Yeah, that's why I shouted you out. And I think that it allows for young people to bike safely, skateboarding, and those types of activities. And I think that it gives people a sense of these are our streets, young people I'm talking about, and that it could actually hopefully deter kids hanging out in different parts. Maybe they find this as somewhere that they can have recreation. And of course you can actually roller skate and rollerblade and bring back fun activities from back in the day. Again, it's all who's managing it. If it's properly managed, it could be a great experience for everyone.
Thank you. Sarah?
What I would say to that is never underestimate the benefits of a sense of community. When you have people that have a safe space to really utilize it together, they come up with programs very organically. And just historically as a people, we've been doing these things in our communities for free with zero funding. I can tell you about the therapeutic gardens. We have been doing therapeutic art classes, yoga, tai chi, nutritional classes, and garden classes with a $0 budget, all through in-kind donations and activating volunteers. So I would say, really think about how beneficial it is when you have the community out, when they are, of course, now socially distanced, just having free activities.
Wonderful. Heather? Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I reiterate what Sarah was saying. My nonprofit is called Help for Youth, and we do everything from building little free libraries to, and that, like, by the way, that could be a huge, amazing open street project. It could be. So I'll get that in a second. But building little free libraries, to doing gardening projects, to our soccer program, which is now indoors and is in danger of getting its funding cut big time. You know, on and on and on. But an example I could give is little free libraries, right? So we build little free libraries. We build them either through kits we get from the Little Free Library organization, or we build them from plywood. You know, we built some with Makerspace with plywood. We built them with ourselves with plywood. I've got one sitting right here in my living room. The Lieutenant Leo one that had a little accident because somebody did something to it, but it's sitting in my living room. So we build them, right? And so a cool open street project would be to, you know, wall off whatever street for, you know, a day and have this cool day when we build like 50 little free libraries and we give them out to schools and parks, and then we turn them into pantries, which we've done with several of them, and we put food in them and supplies. So, you know, you can imagine as amazingly as you can what you can do, not just in terms of I'm physically walking around and I'm jogging and I'm biking, but I'm creating an entire program, a project, because cars aren't necessarily going down the street. So it's incredible. And it's as far as your mind can go is how far, you know, these projects could be. So that's where my mind takes me, is super cool projects where we can get youth involved and get them off the street and not have them involved in activities they shouldn't be involved in. And let's do this all the time. So that's what I think about.
Thank you, Heather. So that was the last question, but I am so like in awe of the panelists. I think what we're learning is that, you know, when we grew up, we did all of that. And, you know, if you take away technology and you bring back open streets, you know, Sarah's right, young people and people are being so creative, and it gives a great place for artistic growth, but also the importance of the mental health component of being outdoors. And so, you know, hats off literally to Rose, who, you know, put this together.
Yay!
And she has been the champion of this. And one of the things during our conversations was the importance of programming or surrounding these open streets. So even if it's a jump rope, even if it's chalk, even if it's a planter, something that we can have, you know, young people or just families do. There's been a lot of stress and trauma just being locked in the house, and being outdoors has to be a therapeutic alternative, not just a transportation alternative. So thanks, Rose, and you can take it from here. And thank you all.
And thank you for being a fabulous moderator.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so I think this is the part of the panel where Camilla kills me. Sorry, Camilla. But you may have gotten an old version of the questions. There were some questions for the DOT as well.
So what happened? Wait. There was one I didn't.
Yeah.
No, I think the questions are great.
There's two I didn't ask because
Okay, the ones for the DOT.
They answered them.
Oh, okay.
There's also a few questions in the chat if we have time for those as well.
Yes. Okay. So yeah. So I am just going to. Okay, yes. You know what? I am going to open it up to open questions from anyone in the audience. And now these questions can be for any of our panelists, or these questions can be for our representatives from the DOT.
I just wanted really quickly to just shout out Adrian Abadi, who had an incredible question. And I just wanted to read it out because it was a little further up in the chat. with people fearing commuting via mass transit and there has to be a rush on bikes, are we seeing more of a groundswell support from community for open streets and bike lanes? Wondering if we can capitalize on this moment.
Great point.
Yeah, it's a great question. It was a great point. I mean, I've been riding a lot more. So, and thinking about that a lot more.
Yeah.
And this is definitely something that I would love to hear a response from the DOT about, about capitalizing on the growth in biking and how, we can modify our street infrastructure in response.
So I think as a bike person here, I'll talk about that. And yeah, I think we've definitely seen, just for a lot, the numbers that we're seeing internally, we're seeing a big groundswell in cycling. It's been less in terms of the weekday, which is usually our peaks, and in fact, it's moved over to the weekend. So you can see that, like, probably what you've seen out in the streets is that people are really getting out there and riding bicycles. And so we've been working throughout the city for the past few months now to develop temporary bike lanes where we don't actually have a bike lane just now, and so we are a little bit limited in terms of our resources, but we're starting to expand. And so we've been using barrels on certain streets, and we've been expanding now to using also more permanent markings when putting these out, so we can see an expansion of bike lanes. And recently, TA from Staten Island and several members of the Staten Island community have been sending us suggestions for bike paths and routes on Staten Island. And so we've been analyzing them, and we hope to be able to come out with some routes for you and to be able to talk more about that when we have those.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah, and also just to put a plug right now is, if you see a route that you think is important, you should always reach out to us, because that, we kind of depend on the public, because, a lot of times when we do these projects, we have a lot of background to go on to develop them. We have complaints from the community already that we get. We want a bike lane here. We also have data from various sources that shows where people are cycling, that teaches us where we should be building our bike lanes. And so, I think it's really important for people to understand that you really should feel free to reach out to us and ask us about it. And because we have systems to record these things, and like having that information is really important to us, so we know where people want bike lanes, where it's important to people, and where we should be focusing our resources at. So I hope that you all will be able to spread the word that it is important to reach out. It's important to contact us. And I know that, reaching out to a city bureaucracy sometimes seems like, oh, you don't get a response to stuff. And I know it's kind of frustrating in that sense, but, we've worked to improve our systems of recording these things. So I would really ask you to take advantage of it.
And would you mind putting a link in the chat to where people, to how people can get in touch with the DOT?
Yeah, sure. I'll send a link. The best way to do it is through our website. We have a contact, and it's basically you reach out to the borough's commissioner's office, because they're the front-facing aspects of the community for us. And so, yeah, I'll pop a link in for you right now.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm gonna open, open our discussion for an open Q&A in a moment. But there was another comment that I saw in the chat that I just want to get to first. And this comment was from Sarah Hertog, and I apologize if I mispronounced your last name. But she had some concerns about the open street on Bank Street. Since trucks are still driving on that open street. And I just think that this is also an opportunity to bring up the importance of community, creating more of a community conversation about where open streets should go. And so I was hoping that, either one of you from the DOT could respond to A, concerns about safety on the Bank Street open street, and B, how, measures that you're taking to get the community more involved in, making decisions on where open streets should go.
Yeah, specific to like really urgent concerns, definitely reach out to the borough commissioner's office and inform of anything you see. If it's something obviously perilous to life or immediately dangerous, 911 is your option. 311 is a way to go as well. But you can reach out to the borough commissioner's office directly by phone, email. You can even reach out to us via Twitter or any other social media platform. That might be one of the more swifter ways to get things on. That specific issue sounds like there's an enforcement need there. And depending on how that street is managed, we can follow up with the precinct and bring that to their attention. I think the bigger question, and correct me if I have wandered a bit too far, is just about implementing, managing, and messaging these open streets to the community, which is something that we really look to our community partners to do. Earlier on, I said the preferred model for an open street is when it's managed by a partner organization that has a vested interest in the neighborhood that they're in, that has a vested interest in keeping that open street really well operating and maintained, and looks to use it for other purposes in its lifetime. And so working together, relying on each other, and looking to you all on the ground to really do the communication and the coordination is sort of the way we get these things out. And as the program evolves, we're going to be looking to you more to come back to us and let us know where they should be and how they should function.
And I just want to push back against that a little bit. Since I think that there is a huge importance on getting community feedback on where open streets should go and which open streets are working. But I also think that relying on community enforcement of open streets and community management of open streets, it creates a disparity in which open streets work and which open streets don't work, since only some communities have the resources to be able to manage open streets. And then you're basically allowing open streets that are in wealthier communities that have more resources to work better. So I definitely think that the city needs to get more involved in managing these open streets so that you don't see those existing disparities.
No, I agree with you and understand completely. A lot of our programs, unfortunately, fall along the lines of community capacity, and we know that capacity is sort of built through wealth and socioeconomic status, and the traditional sort of squeaky wheels tend to get the traditional grease. We do what we can to fight against that, to get out as far as we can. A lot of our programs seek to meet communities at their level of capacity and fill in where we can. Open streets sort of rolled out from an emergency need, an urgent need. It has little to no resources behind it. I don't have a budget for it. So it makes it very hard to get out there. And so the ask right now in the current version of the Open Streets program is, yeah, we all have to do this kind of sweat equity grassroots style. The hope is that we, as this evolves into a formalized program or a less of an emergent situation and more of a, now we have an open street typology, that operationalization can help us get to communities and help us stay in communities where there isn't as much support as there might be in other locations.
Yeah, can I jump in? I do agree with Andrew. I mean, I'm gonna just throw this out there. So we were told that we could set up for open streets. I mean, I guess this is DOT as well. In any case, we were given an outline, a sketch of what the barricades should look like, so that everyone did that. We went out and spent money on that, and then I think it was yesterday or today's Wednesday, on Monday, we were then told it had to be a different outline was put out. So now you have like Bayou, had to remove their barricade. I mean, I think again, that highlights the challenge with having city agencies micromanage sort of these new initiatives, because it's like a double-edged sword. And now we have to spend twice as much money that we don't really have to address these issues. And that, again, that's causes duress. And if you've got the business owner, a small business owner who's borrowing money to open, they're just probably going to wind up shutting down because they can't deal with the inconsistency. So I think it's, these things are neighborhood by neighborhood, case by case. It's been a very frustrating period, I have to tell you, both as a small business owner, as an activist. it's just overwhelming, you know.
I mean, I have a quick question which goes along to exactly what Bobby is saying, which is, I keep wanting to say Mr. G.
We
Bobby
gotta
is
talk about
saying,
that later.
drop the mister, drop the mister. Which he's saying, and Sarah has a comment about it too, which is, you know, I think probably one of the issues, and Rose, you could probably speak to this as well as our friends DOT, is, you know, if we had projects and programs and events and things going on, then I think the community potentially could even get more behind some of this. If we just have, you know, an open street and it's just there and it's like, hey, everybody should know it's just gonna be, it should be open for people to do what they want. I think that's tougher. So I think maybe getting CBOs more involved in small businesses and, you know, the Bobby Jesus world involved, so that we're doing so like, you know, me and Bobby are like, hey, let's plan this great program in front of your restaurant that's also this, you know, I think if we did that, potentially it would be better. But I'm interested in hearing from DOT in terms of, does that make sense to you? If we had, you know, robust programming, does that make sense, or does that make less sense? I'm just curious.
It makes sense to me because I live in the world of programming. You know,
Wait, what's your name again?
Right.
Who are you?
It's on the screen.
Can I get your virtual card? I need to know you. Okay, Andrew.
A lot of our public spaces live and die by the way they kind of weave into the texture of a community.
Right.
And I personally believe that that's done through programming and
Yep.
allowing communities to demonstrate ownership of the space through their programming.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, it's a very difficult line to walk sometimes, kind of working on sort of the government side of things, the bureaucratic side of things, and seeing a community desire and seeing what makes practical, logical sense on the ground, and trying to figure out how to translate both worlds and make it work. But you know, the one of the most successful open streets currently is in 34th Avenue. It stretches from Corona to Jackson Heights, Queens.
I live in Queens. I'm actually in Queens right now. I live in White Stone.
Oh, okay.
I'll go check it out.
Yeah, I'm 2 blocks away. We should meet up.
Hey, all right.
But 34th Avenue, you know, there's a history of volunteerism and a lot of local activism in the neighborhood. And it just, when 34th Avenue started as a pilot, it sort of stopped. And the community really got up and advocated and pushed for it. And they went from 9 blocks to 23 blocks. And they have managed every day through sheer volunteer power to have people out there putting up the barriers. They're doing programming they're not supposed to quite do yet, but you know, and it's, that enthusiasm has really informed the future for that particular open street. I'm not saying that's the only way things get done, but it certainly helps when you have, when the community demonstrates the use. You know, I'd rather us play the catch up. You know, you tell us what to do and we'll catch it up rather than us tell you how to use it. So.
I mean, can we pilot more of this? I mean, you know, Rose, you're the mastermind, the guru of all of this. But I mean, you know, I'm a person that likes results. I don't like to just jibber jabber about jibber jabbering and then jibber jabber more. So I love results. So I mean, it would be possible to like pilot something where we get, you know, the panelists and you and Rose involved in some sort of a, you know, distinct project and just try it out. Can we do that?
I would love that.
We can certainly talk about that for sure.
Okay.
You'd be all over that, so.
Okay, I was great. So let's definitely have sort of like a action plan of talking, having a meeting, and coming up with some sort of a pilot project. And I will vow to be somebody that will be decently engaged in this and very involved. And let's see what happens, right?
Absolutely.
I feel like it could be like a citizens committee grant, right? Couldn't we do some of these neighborhood grants to support open street?
100%. And actually, my nonprofit just got a COVID Citizens Committee grant. So I mean, you know, I know that their neighborhood grants are a little bit in suspension right now. But their COVID grants, they did 1 cycle. I think they're going to do a 2nd cycle. So it's certainly something that we can talk with them about. I might have gone to college with their new executive director, so we can have that conversation with him. And, you know, let's talk and see if they're interested in, you know, maybe going in with us on something. I think it's a brilliant idea.
Yes, and I think we just decided on our new grants director for Citizens Committee.
Andrew, I actually have a question for you.
But anyway, so I do have to open this.
I like that.
This discussion to the larger audience, since you know you guys have been patient for a while. I know that Sarah Hertog, you know, had something else that she wanted to mention regarding, you know, what the Bank Street deficiencies are illustrated of, or illustrative of. But you know, before we get to that, I want to see if anybody else has a question first. So yeah, if you have a question to ask, then please you can either A, type in the chat that you have a question you want to ask, or B, you can use the hand raise function on Zoom.
Rose, while we're waiting for the participants to put their questions in the chat, I actually have a quick question for Andrew, since we have your ear. Can you talk briefly about the specific criteria for CBOs to put in an application for open streets? What are you looking for a street that's like, yeah, that's where we can put an open street?
For CBO specifically, the criteria is comparatively light to other programs that we have. It really is just it can be as informal as a group of unincorporated concerned citizens that just want to do something.
Okay.
It's probably better to have some level of formal structure and some level of, you know, obviously more capacity makes it easier to manage these things. And then for the actual site selection itself, the basic requirements is not on a bus route, not on a truck route. And there is vetting that's done, a vetting process that goes on after a proposal is made with the police department, with fire, with other parts of the city agencies to make sure that access for whatever their purposes might be is not fettered. And then generally, because the workload is very sort of light lift, at a minimum, it's really just putting barricades out and taking them back. It's comparatively easy. There is for groups, there's a letter of agreement we ask them to sign. All the letter does is say, you're doing this, the city is aware that you're doing this, thanks for doing it, have fun, sort of letter. But so it's light touch for now, yeah.
That sounds really, really easy. And Dana actually has a question in the chat that goes right along with this that says, how long, what does that time frame look like when someone goes to apply for that?
The approval process, the sort of back end of the approval process is where it gets a little more complicated just because of the coordination with different agencies. It takes a little longer to get through and make sure everybody gets their say in it. So there isn't a specific timeline for approval. We've had people propose an open street and wait a month or more, which is unfortunate. And we've had people propose an open street and get it next week. I think as the program is sort of leveling off for now, I think approvals might come a little swifter just because there's less volume. But it's one of those sort of bureaucratic sort of black holes until we can pull it out the other end.
Andrew, I'm sorry, maybe I missed this, but once you apply, how long does your application last for? What's the duration?
Like from application to approval, there isn't a specific timeline, unfortunately, but like.
No, I mean,
no.
like once you get approved, is it a specific, is it, okay, this open street is going to be an open street for 2 months, 3 months, 8 months. Is there a specific time period for which it is designated as an open street?
Right now it's until Labor Day weekend.
Oh, okay.
Every open street is until Labor Day weekend.
Okay.
And we have to see what the direction is from City Hall on if they continue past that.
Okay.
I think it's fair to say also that some of the open streets that are out there are informing future iterations of an open streets program. But I can't say that like on October 1, I can't tell you there's going to be an open streets program. But
gotcha.
So there's also a question I have for Andrew. I know that this came up in the discussions. So maybe the audience also needs to know that you can close the street at certain times and days, so it's flexible. So you may say you want an open street on Saturdays or Sundays from a certain time to a certain time. That way, the CBOs can program that the neighborhood knows
Right.
on this day that it's closed, so it's not in perpetuity, like this street is closed from now until Labor Day. You do have the opportunity to choose the date and time and the consistency of the open street.
Yeah, I guess that was my better point. And I mean, many moons ago, my nonprofit had gone in and applied for an open street in Staten Island on Hill Street, and we were denied. We didn't do a good job with the application, to be honest with you, and we didn't make a good case for it being an open street. But I learned a lot from the process, and one of the huge things that I learned was just it's a very wide street. But it's also very short. Hill Street it's not a big street. And so, you can learn a lot through going through a process like that. And so is there a way for us to, because the timeline is so short, is there a way for us to just sort of know, hey, if you put in an application and you say you want to do a Saturday on X street from 1 to 5 every Saturday, that's probably a better application. Or would we talk with you about that? What would be the best way to do that?
I think maybe we should do it sort of case by case and do a conversation, but there's nothing stopping you from sending an email, which you should, to the Borough Commissioner's Office proposing open streets. Slight nuance, if you want to propose an open streets restaurants activation, there's a whole online application process for that. That process has up to a 14-day turnaround time from application to implementation, and is also currently slated to go through Labor Day. But because of the restaurant piece and that process is a bit more structured now and easier to follow along, and right now, because we're trying to roll them out, is probably going to move a little swifter than a typical open street.
Okay, so I found 3 questions / comments from audience members in the chat. So I'm going to read them out in the order in which I got them. So the first one was from, Sarah Hertog, going back to the Bank Street open street, but also like larger implications of it. And so she wrote, the Bank Street deficiencies are illustrative of the larger problem that our community's lack of access to the waterfront. The half-mile stretch of Bank Street accessible only via Jersey Street. The opposite end by the wheel is blocked by security. Don't we have an opportunity now to push hard for continuous bike/pedestrian access along our waterfront from Jersey Street to Stapleton via Front Street? How can we leverage open streets to do that? Yeah, I don't know how you would go from Jersey. Well, anyway, basically, the idea is that there should be an opportunity to, push for expanded access to the waterfront, since the roads we have that are along the waterfront are deficient. And so, I guess I'm going to open that up, either to panelists, or if the DOT wants to take a stab at, whether or not this was a thought process you guys were having, about expanding access to the waterfront for pedestrians and cyclists.
I'd like to hear DOT on this.
Yeah, I don't know that I can speak very specifically to Bank Street, just because it's really for our Staten Island office, like, to kind of coordinate and plan. And I'm honestly not familiar enough with Bank Street itself to speak intelligently on it. But to the concept of using open streets to perhaps suggest a future condition or a future iteration of something that provides access to waterfront or improves bike access or whatever, I think that's inherent in the program, because, like I said, we are looking at some of these open streets now that might inform even new typologies of streets in the future, or might just become different use the way they are. So to the extent that an open street can help demonstrate an idea, it can be a very valuable tool for that.
Yeah, and I definitely do just want to second that for decades, Staten Island has had, difficult access to the waterfront on the North Shore for pedestrians and cyclists, and this is something that a lot of people on the island would love to see improved on both the east and the west side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next issue was brought up by Chris Kulba, and she was, I can't find the exact comment again. Oh, okay, here we are. Yeah, so she was basically talking about, this is not an open street, but, she was talking about how the new Springville Greenway is becoming very crowded, and it's becoming harder to social distance the new Springville Greenway. And so, I guess that is definitely an opportunity for more space in the new Springville area. And, in that area, since if we are seeing, increased interest in walking and biking in an area, then I definitely think that's something that the DOT should be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I definitely did, want to bring that up.
Sure.
And also, Michael Mantillo had a question as well. So he asked, I'm curious as to the role equity plays in the DOT's decisions to create, I'm curious as to the role equity plays in the DOT's decisions to create open streets. While we fully understand the rapid time frame that streets have been implemented and the many challenges faced by the DOT, a number of sources have pointed to disparities throughout the city in where open streets are located and who they serve. How can we make sure that open streets on Staten Island, and let me just scroll down, how can we make sure that open streets on Staten Island are best designed to equitably serve the communities that need them most?
Yeah, the criteria for open streets attempted to sort of have an equity model in mind, of course, that also looked at COVID infection rates and neighborhoods hardest hit specifically by the pandemic. And I think we all know the lines that those fall along as well. The rollout, I don't know, achieved that goal, but it had that goal. And I think the best answer I can give is we need more sort of teaching from the community and more advocacy from the community to drag us out. As much as we all try, like my unit is 8 people. As much as we all try to canvass and cover the entire city, we really, that's again, I come back to relying on our community partners to advocate and host forums like this and draw our attention to places where it's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Does anybody else have any questions? Again, you can either put them in the chat, or you can also use your hand raise function.
I have a question, David. What's your title in your role actually?
I'm so I work with the bicycle unit, part of the planning division of DOT, and I'm a project manager there. So generally, I handle requests that come in, and then I take requests from whether the public or public officials or general agencies, and I help turn those into projects with my team, and then we implement them. So you'll see projects we've done around the communities. Like the most recent ones we've been doing have been Broad Street and Vanderbilt and Stapleton, and we've been doing some work out in the East Shore of Staten Island on Guyan Avenue, Seaview Avenue, and New York Lane. So if you want to reach out, like I said, the best way really is, I always stress this, is definitely contact the commissioner's office. I read
those correspondence that you sent to me, and it really does give me a lot of knowledge. You know, Robert writes to me a lot, and you know, I take his info in and I try to work those into projects too. And so again, I say to people, please, please, please write to us. You know, because when I joined DOT, a lot of times I always thought that like the reason why things didn't happen was there was some, you know, people wanted it, but there's something blocking it. And a lot of times it's amazing how many people don't write to us and don't ask for these things. And so I think it's, you know, a big takeaway I would like people to know is that, you know, reaching out to us and contacting us and putting your voice out there, getting that down there, like so people actually see you and hear you is like important. And,
that's right. Thanks for sharing.
I do have an additional question, and Rose, please let me know if this is too off topic. Can we talk a little bit about cool streets and which open street sections were able to meet that criteria for cool streets, and why Staten Island seemed to kind of be left out of that?
I guess I can answer that, or try to. Yeah, so the Cool Streets Initiative looked at heat index data, and it wasn't done, you know, they looked at our existing open streets, and folks from another agency kind of layered the heat index data over it and cited the current list of cool streets based on their interpretation of that data. I can't speak to why Staten Island might not have gotten a fair share or any. I can't remember right now. But what I can definitely do is take that back and make sure the folks above my head are aware that that was asked. So I don't think by all means I don't think the list that's out now is the final list. I think it'll grow.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And I just want to talk, just touching again on the equity proponent. In specific neighborhoods where residents don't have air conditioning, where there might be higher, you know, rates of maybe asthma exacerbations, the cool streets would definitely need to be prioritized for those neighborhoods. Is that something that's kind of on your radar when you're determining these locations?
Yeah, again, it wasn't our unit that determined them, but I believe that factors in. I don't know the exact list of criteria that they use, but I know that they look at a lot of places that have conditions that you're mentioning, lack of access to individual air conditioning, high rates of asthma, et cetera, also factor into the decisions. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Sure.
So we are going to be ending our discussion soon, but just to clarify for folks, the Cool Streets program is a program that puts spray caps on the ends of fire hydrants to allow the fire hydrants to open up in the summer to, you know, kind of give sprinklers to the community. So that's what Sarah and Andrew were talking about. And the DOT had recently released a list of which neighborhoods would be receiving Cool Streets, and Staten Island was not on that list. But Mayor de Blasio did actually announce, I forget if it was today or yesterday, that Staten Island would be added, although which street or which neighborhood in Staten Island was not revealed yet. So just to get everyone on the same page. Yeah, so if there are no other questions, we are getting, you know, close to 7:30. Oh, Adrian, do you have a question? Okay, so I think she was just unmuted. Anyway, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. You know, I want to stress that if you believe that there is a need for open streets in your community, then I think there are two things that definitely need to happen. I love to see, you know, community input in where we want to see open streets. And so if you want to see open streets in your neighborhood, then I would say there are two things. You know, one, talk to your neighbors, see if your neighbors are on board, you know, see if your neighbors have concerns, speak to, you know, businesses in the area. If there is, you know, large support for an open street on a certain block in your neighborhood, then please apply. You know, again, the DOT is looking had where the and so if you want to see an open street in your neighborhood, but you don't apply and you don't start talking to your neighbors, then it's not going to happen. Some magical fairy godmother is not going to wave a wand and make it happen.
Oh, really?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Okay, Godfather.
I thought Rose was gonna. I thought she was the fairy god. I thought she was the fairy godmother.
But you guys, before we leave, and thanks everybody. But what do you guys think of doing a walkthrough with like the panelists and DOC? Because I'm looking at like Fairway, which is like real near 220 Osgood. I mean, there's no houses. So that nobody has to go past there to parking. It doesn't block a major throughway. So I think that maybe we should do a 5 part of what we were talking about, Bobby, with the 120.
Yeah.
We should combine that and then look and do a walkthrough and see what streets, so we're not back here again.
100%.
Good idea.
Who the block captains are, who's going to be the cheerleader of that block, and then see if we can do that. And so each neighborhood, because Bobby and I were talking about doing programming in Park Hill, Tompkinsville, Stapleton, Port Richmond, and Manus Harbor, which really needs.
They need it, yeah.
A lot of it.
Yeah, I am absolutely 100% down for organizing walkthroughs in Port Richmond, Marinus Harbor, Tompkinsville, Stapleton, and other neighborhoods,
Park Hill,
Staten Island, and definitely Park Hill, where there is a high need. So yeah, I am definitely going to make that happen.
And I really like the point of that you just said, both of you just said, of not being back here again, except if we are back here, we're talking about our programming and the great things we're doing and getting out the word and newsletters. So I'm happy to be back here again, as long as we're talking about part 2, which is the things we're doing in the great open streets that we have. So
Okay.
exactly, we can't be back here again having the same conversation.
no.
Okay.
Not available for that. Sorry.
Calendar is full.
For real.
So I am going to be ending this discussion soon, but I do want to mention one small thing before. This was only a panel discussion, and yet we have 2 next steps already.
Great.
After a panel discussion.
We're not available for just another chat. I love it.
Rose, you were good. You were good at really putting a good team, panelists, a good group together, and even the guests. It's a great team of people. Doers. You brought doers together.
Doers.
Yes, exactly. Do it again. Get stuff done. Thank you, Rose, as always. You're a superstar. You're amazing.
Okay, so once again, thank you for joining us tonight. Yeah, it was great having you all, and I hope to see you all on the street soon.
Thanks, everyone.